Sonic Unleashed is often regarded as one of the best Sonic games to date. It ushered in the largely consistent boost era with its focus on intense speed and reaction-based gameplay. Unfortunately, I've never gotten used to the whole reaction-based gameplay bit. I'm what they call a person who likes to live in the past. The Queen died! While a bit controversial at the time, this is going to be a fan favorite, one that stands tall with other critically acclaimed games in the franchise like SA2 and Generations. Unleashed was a stepping stone for the series and one that innovated on the franchise in ways we haven't seen. It cranked up the speed to 11, gave us a more lighthearted but well-written story, and introduced us to the boost style of gameplay, which aside from the stinker of the bunch, is straight up a great gameplay style. I've never played Unleashed in its entirety because it's not a super accessible game, although I've been able to play basically every act of the game due to several mods and tweaks in Sonic Generations, and it's a great time. Let's dial the clock back to around December 2001, where Sonic Advance released just 4 months after the towers fell those insensitive sons of bitches. Sonic Advance wasn't a primary Sonic Team game, what was essentially a commission game by the game company Dimps. Sega wanted their output on handheld titles during the time to be more prevalent and stack up with that of home consoles, and so they got Dimps to make full original Sonic games on handheld. This spawned the Sonic Advance trilogy from 2001 to 2004, a set of games that were based on the classics of yesteryear while innovating and making a game that truly felt like a modern 2D game. For the most part, people seem to really like these games and they did well. So when the hot new handheld, the Nintendo DS, came around, Sega decided to commission them again for the Sonic Rush duology of games. Well-liked entries in the series for sure, and ones that innovated more, technically being the introduction of the boost. By 2007, Dimps had these 5 games under their belt, and each of them did pretty well. They were all original games too. While obviously the larger Sega company oversaw the project, Dimps had a majority of creative control with these. Flash forward a bit, as Sonic Team is working on the newest and biggest game, Sonic Unleashed. While they wanted it to be on all modern consoles, the team realized shortly after it started that there was no way this thing would work on a Wii. It barely worked on the top-notch consoles at the time. The problem was the Wii was home to a hefty amount of Sonic fans, not to mention the incredible sales of the Wii, and you're losing out on a good amount of sales by not having the game on it. So Sonic Team came up with the idea not to split the team in two to make a downgraded version, but commissioned Dimps to make a fully 3D demake of the game to put on the Wii and PS2 because that console sold like nuts. This was interesting because up to this point, Dimps had only made fully original 2D games, so something like this was a complete 180 from their usual output. It would have the same story and general gameplay of the main console versions, and it would be 3D. So did they pull it off? Well, it's more than a simple yes or no answer. Sonic Unleashed, as it's dubbed by many fans, has many strengths and weaknesses unique to this version, meaning the only way to take a look at all of them is to start at the beginning. First of all, you know the drill, like, subscribe, do all that, Discord server link in the description, blah blah blah, I'm not gonna waste your time. Now, there's gonna be some small miscellaneous things that I won't cover in detail because they straight up do not matter objectively, like the title screen. It's different, like malaria. Getting straight into it, one thing you'll notice throughout the game is how cutscenes work in this game. On the HD versions, you had these high-quality cutscenes that you saw in full detail, whereas the Wii version was taken out back and shot. They play in the form of heavily compressed video files. The native resolution of the Wii is 480p, meaning it's hard to fully appreciate the cutscenes, especially the opening one. A funny side effect about the way the Wii version is cropped, I'm pretty sure you end up actually seeing more of the cutscene. In the HD console version, there were these black bars that obscured the top and bottom of the screen during the opening cutscene. But here, those bars were completely absent, and it turns out the obscured bits of the HD version was rendered, meaning you actually see more of the cutscene in the Wii version than you do in the home console. Interesting fact I thought I'd share with you all. But yeah, these cutscenes are way lower quality than the HD release, and it takes me out at points. The in-game cutscenes don't really bother me because the graphics match more closely to the gameplay, but the beautifully fully rendered Marza animations end up feeling wrong at this lower quality, as it's clearly meant to be viewed at a higher resolution. Small nitpicks aside, this game starts the same as the HD version. Sonic gets shot out of a penis and lands on ship, yada yada. The story of HD Unleashed is completely preserved here. It's not a Colors DS situation where the story remains the same, but the way said plot happens takes creative liberties and differs from the main game. Unleashed is about as one-to-one as you can get, with the only small differences being the ones I'll go over in due time. Finally, heading into actual gameplay, it's interesting what they did here. Getting this out of the way, the tutorials suck, straight up. In the HD version, you have these hint rings that put text at the bottom of the screen without interrupting the flow of gameplay. In Unleashed, Sonic completely freezes as Chip flies in the screen as a text box shows up telling you what to do. On its own, it's not horrible, but it's a huge pace breaker and happens like every 5 seconds. But this is only a problem really during the first stage, so it's over and done with pretty painlessly. The obvious thing to point out in this game is the visual differences between versions. Unleashed HD was a game that looked so good it took more than 2 console generations to maintain 30 FPS, so naturally the Wii version is going to look worse in comparison. Either because of this or time constraints, 2 stages didn't make it in, being Skyscraper Scamper and Missouri, whatever that was called. The latter only containing a boss fight and cutscene. This also erased hub worlds from the game. In HD Unleashed, each area had a hub world, which in the script I named Hub World. Now it's just text boxes on a PNG of a map, and I would have preferred they removed it completely because it doesn't really immerse me, and the quote gameplay here is literally nothing at all. I will say though, considering the obvious downgrade of quality, I do think Unleashed looks pretty nice for the hand it was dealt. While obviously lacking in the finer details, stages like Windmill Island, Eggman Land are crammed with detail and environmental design that the HD version had. These stages are still instantly recognizable and look pretty good. I'll tackle some of the stages in detail later, but at the moment, we need to see the pure gameplay differences this offers. For the most part, Sonic's moveset is completely intact. The homing attack, slide, wall jump, boost, all of that has been retained, except the boost specifically. It works almost completely different from the HD version, this being the thing that ends up differentiating the versions the most. In the HD version, you gather ring energy and hold down the boost button for a continuous burst of speed that only runs out when your gauge does. In Unleashed, this gauge is separated into multiple bars, and when you activate the boost done by shaking the Wii Remote, you get close to a 2 to 3 second big burst of speed until going back to normal running speed. Instead of a boost that's continuous unless your gauge runs out, the boost here is fragmented into multiple small bursts of speed. This has a few effects on the game. Number one, obviously the boost is different, meaning some people naturally aren't going to like this version as much because of it. In here I'm fine with it because it spices things up from the status quo of the boost formula, and number two of what I was saying before, it requires level design to be made around how it operates. The boost state works different from the regular boost. As you go straight forward, it's nearly impossible to control Sonic while it's active unless you use a nearly perfectly timed drift or you quick step. This means the levels are more designed around pulling off perfectly timed boosts than big reactionary set pieces. In Unleashed, there will often be a straight line that you're supposed to boost to the end of. The challenge comes in the form of the boost itself. You need to be lined up perfectly with that line or else you'll completely pass it because you can't really course correct with Sonic during the duration of the boost. You're really enticed to play through the stage accurately, as if you make a sloppy turn or drift that leads into one of these straight lines, you may need to readjust for a second or two before pulling off a boost, which loses you a few seconds. Say you make a perfect drift and end it with you facing straight towards the end, you let a boost rip and you get there instantly. Boosting at bad times is punished pretty heavily in this game, and the way I think they do it is For one thing, if you boost straight into a wall, Sonic does this charming little animation of him flattening before popping back up, and while cute, does get a bit frustrating after a while. Also, overshooting a turn with a boost means you'll have to completely turn Sonic around and readjust, which usually wouldn't be a problem. However, the direction that Sonic's boost goes is based off where he's facing rather than where the camera is facing, meaning you have to wait for Sonic to do a full turn if you want to get right back into the action with the boost. Again, you can get used to this if you're good at levels, but for newcomers or your average player who will get hit with one of these a few times, it can get frustrating. This partly being a problem with the controls of the game. The main control scheme, and the one I use for this game, is the Wii Remote and Nunchuck. This isn't inherently a bad thing, as colors felt fine on the Wii except for how easily Sonic could be turned. It felt like a small gust of wind would completely take him off course, which sadly is present on Unleashed. I don't mind the motion controls they threw in all honesty, the homing attack and boost being mapped to a swing. It doesn't really bother me. However, there is a noticeable input delay with this, making precise movements and turns always risky and sometimes not work entirely. Could it be a problem with my controls specifically? There's always a chance, but I've tried 2 Wii Remotes and 2 Nunchucks and both have the same problem. I'm skimming over this as it could be a me problem, and it's something that you could get used to, but it's something I thought worth pointing out in case it's not a me problem. Motion delay. It's ass. Overall, I'm quite a fan of this altered boost formula gameplay. It's not something I want for every game, but I really do just find it fun as a one-off. Focusing on the level design, it's for sure more linear and straightforward than the HD version, having more hallways than seen in that version. This, like I mentioned earlier, is a product of how the boost works, which I'm also pretty sure is faster than its HD counterpart. The level design, if anything, is most reminiscent of SA2, being more linear but being about the mastery of levels more so than the skip-heavy SA1. I think this gives the game a very unique standing. To me, it's the closest we've gotten to the adventure-era gameplay formula, maybe more so than Shadow Generations? If there's a single word to describe the level design and overall gameplay feel of Unleashed, it's snappy. Maintaining flow in this game feels, to put it simply, snappy. There's this quick slowdown that occurs when you boost into an enemy, which amplifies the satisfaction of the action, especially when you boost into multiple in a row. In boost games, you run through them so nonchalantly when boosting that it doesn't feel super satisfying, but here, boost fodder enemies are used more sparingly and, in turn, feel more special when you do boost through them. A special one-off mechanic they introduced in this version is the action chain, and while not super in-depth, aids in the satisfaction of otherwise mundane homing attack chains, or, well, anything. Homing attacking a badnik, then hitting a spring, then a zipline, all of this builds your action chain. I feel like the action chain would have been a great way to get more score, however, S-ranks in this game are, like, almost entirely time-based, meaning those action chains don't really serve a purpose beyond being a good job sticker. Going back on what I briefly mentioned, homing attack chains are something that I feel have also been done the best here. The sound design for hitting enemies in this game is top tier for one, and there is a natural extra ounce of satisfaction that comes with the homing attack being bound to a Wii Remote swing. You may find it extra, but I find that it aids in the satisfaction of performing them. Clearly I misspelled something because it says levels aren't littered everywhere like they would. I don't know what that means, so let's just, yeah. And when there are homing chains, they're used more creatively and sparingly. There's one example in Chun-Nan when you start a homing chain mid-air and then fall down a bit after the second one to continue a homing chain down below for an extra route. This game's shortcuts feel so nice to pull off. Most of the time, it doesn't take anything crazy to pull them off to get to higher routes, but like I mentioned before, they all feel snappy. Everything in this game feels like a rhythm. There's a rhythm of events happening here. It almost feels like you're on beat with some of these actions that occur, giving the whole game this almost rhythmic feel to it that really feels satisfying. I know I keep using that word, and I apologize because satisfying is a really cheap buzzword, but for lack of a better term, I keep using it because, well, while repetitive, it's true. One thing that's incorporated a lot more in this game is lightspeed dashes, and in my opinion, this is the best lightspeed dashes have ever been used throughout the franchise. It's quick, snappy, and is used in pretty cool ways. A homing chain that ends with a lightspeed dash to keep the top route, a gap that's in front of you that's crossed easily with one to maintain speed, it's really nice. They aren't used a lot or anything, but when they are, they always land, even if they aren't the craziest piece of level design. They're usually telegraphed very well too. That one in Chun-Nan I mentioned pretty earlier is a bit of a stinker when it comes to that. It can be pretty hard to see, but aside from that, it's actually great. One thing to mention about the level design is I was pleasantly surprised by the 2D sections of all things. I find that Dimps really knew the strengths and weaknesses of modern Sonic being placed in a 2D, and actually thought out its platforming and speed challenges very well. 2D in a lot of Sonic games are the dedicated platforming time moments. There's not many speed moments present in them, and it's usually dedicated to platforming, but here, it is mostly speed focused, and it nails it most of the time. Especially in Cool Edge, you'll be seeing footage in the background of it, but it feels so good. There's a time in most Sonic Boost games where most people get to the 2D sections and start to not dread them, but there's a clear idea within most people's minds that the 2D sections are worse by design, and the thing is, it doesn't have to be like this. 2D can and has worked well in Sonic. It's the sections themselves that I find to be the bad part. And on Wish, I find these sections to be on par with the rest of the stage. It never really feels like the bad part of the level to me, and that's something that really took me by surprise when I went back to replay it. I never once dreaded a level because of its 2D. I thought it was all done very well. Despite the budget, I'd say there's still mostly a 75-25 split of 3D and 2D, with 3D taking the majority. But even then, I don't mind this. I think this would have been the perfect opportunity to give us more acts that were strictly 2D. Instead, we have what we were given. These small challenge acts that I don't think change up the level design at all. Collect a certain amount of rings, don't break the jars. That's basically as unique as they ever get. And it's always just sanctioned bits of level and not new pieces of level entirely, which is just a bummer. I actually would have loved to see more bite-sized levels that were just 2D. I do want to say, I'm pretty sure there's extra acts you can unlock with new pieces of level design, but I'm going to be completely honest with you all. I never played them. Sorry. Now it's time to address the elephant in the room. The Werehog. Ooh, fucking scary. I've surprisingly had almost nothing but praise towards the actual Sonic portion of the game, but we all know that isn't how the story goes with Unleashed, because we have the Werehog to deal with. And it's fine. Like, I'm gonna go more in depth in just a second, but in short, it's alright, perfectly serviceable. I didn't dread through the Werehog levels aside from a few small case scenarios, but all in a majority of times, I was fine with it. So, the biggest change from the HD version to this version is the complete change of combat. While still retained, the combat system is heavily watered down, and what remains is a few punch combos with variations of finishers. No quick time event combat, which was probably a good change to be honest. The main reason for this is, in fact, you're playing on a Wii Remote and Nunchuck, and they just had to make the motion controls a gimmick here. They just had to. Each punch is dictated by a swing from either the Nunchuck or Wii Remote respective, just like Punch-Out on the Wii for the easiest comparison. The combat here is really bare bones. It really just consists of swinging the Nunchuck, then Remote, then Nunchuck, then Remote, and then after a few swings, you'll swing both at the same time to do a finisher, that of which changes on how many swings you've previously done. I'm gonna be honest though, it's very bare bones, yes, but it's alright. there's a sort of cheap satisfaction you can get with the mindless combat, and unlike the HD version, there's not a lot of enemy gauntlets where you fight wave after wave of enemy. So the combat never gets super boring, although it's nothing above a B-. Instead, most of the Werehog is focused on platforming. Unfortunately, this platforming is easily the worst part of the entire game. The level design itself isn't actually that bad, it's how the Werehog controls that make it suffer. For one thing, input delay is even worse here, and it's super noticeable. The Werehog is also ridiculously slippery. This led to so many unwarranted deaths that where I tried to make a simple jump but I'd end up sliding off. This even more prominent when you run. Running is even more slippery, and you're better off never running whatsoever when you're placed in a platforming scenario because there's a good 50-50 chance you live or die. When you jump during a run, you are locked into that jump with very little you can do to alter your destination as he gets so stiff in the air. And once you land on the ground, he still takes a second to stop running and the whole thing gets slippery and it's just awful all around. I would only ever run on straightaways because running or run jumping in platforming segments was just me begging for death. You're better off just taking it slow and walking instead of ever thinking about running. It's not even that the platforming is super hard, it's quite easy actually, and nearly all the challenge comes from how the Werehog controls, rather than the intentional difficulty coded into the levels. Take this level of Cool Edge for example. The platforming is really basic, but it's really easy to undershoot a jump and miss. You have two speeds, running and walking, and both are on two extremes. With walking, if you're jumping to another platforming, you're going to be jumping about right at the edge, barely making it. Where if you run, you either end up overshooting, or if you do land, fighting with the slipperiness until you get your bearings. If the Werehog wasn't slippery, I wouldn't be calling these levels great or anything, still, God no. But considering even with the slipperiness, I'm completely content with these levels. Removing it might make them something actually pretty enjoyable, maybe? Also, grabbing onto the ledges with the stretchy arms is always terrifying. You'll jump and then press B so he stretches his arms and to reach out and grab the ledge, but it takes almost 2 full seconds before he actually grabs the ledge, meaning it always looks like you barely make it. This also brings the problem that if you do press B a bit too late, Sonic will visibly go to grab, almost make it, like his hands are right there, but you'll hit a death barrier and you'll die. It can be pretty unfair at times, but most of it is pretty basic, so it never gets rage-inducing, per se. It's just an annoyance whenever it happens. The Werehog had potential here, it really did, but it never does enough with its ideas, and the pure slipperiness of the Werehog holds it back from ever having any fun platforming moments to speak of. Which is a shame, because as I've mentioned before, I'm not against platforming in Sonic. The more platforming-based approach to the Werehog is a good idea and concept, but in execution, it falls completely flat because of the aforementioned slipperiness and because the platforming present ranges from basic and boring to flat-out not fun. This game was dealt a bad hand, because on its own it's a pretty good game when you separate it from HD Unleashed. However, that comparison always looms over it, and therefore it's naturally looked on worse by people. Unfortunately, Dimps would ruin their reputation a bit in the future, as they made a 3DS version of Sonic Lost World, which people despised, the Sonic 4 duology, which needs no introduction, and a 3DS version of Generations, which was also pretty bad. It sucks because on their first run of a 3D remake, they kind of knocked it out of the park. This isn't just a worse version of Sonic Unleashed in my eyes, it's a game that's really good on its own, but unfortunately had to live with the comparison of a more widely loved and higher budget game. While it had its flaws, Sonic Unleashed is a game I hold in high regards and one I hold a lot of fond memories for. Despite its drawbacks, the core Sonic gameplay is really unique and stands pretty strong on its own, with great level design, satisfying and snappy gameplay, and a continuation of SA2 design philosophies that are heavily slept on. If you have a Wii, please try it out. Emulators don't do it justice at all. You really need the full experience for this game if you really want to enjoy it to the fullest extent. This was a game from my childhood, and when I came back to replay it, I was worried that it wouldn't be as good as I remember it. If anything, I like it better now, as I'm able to appreciate its unique approach to the boost formula of games, and understand its strengths considering the hand it was dealt and the lower budget Dimps had to work with. With all that said, I hope you all enjoyed. If you did, consider subscribing, liking the video, commenting, and all that stuff. If you want to support me, I also have a channel membership for only $5 and a Discord server where I talk and post frequent updates. See y'all next time. Peace.